20s, you spawn into a blocky 1950s skyline where the red block and blue union glare over a giant pixel map. Except their Cold War is fought with glowing redstone cores, launch codes stitched on strips of colored wool, and a trench-coated creeper selling secrets in the subway. The arms race here looks like a redstone tutorial gone geopolitical. Skyscrapers sprout antennae topped with blinking comparators, subway jingles are coded messages, propaganda posters are pixel art animated with repeaters. At center stage stands our central character, Marshall Redwell, a stern, block-faced statesman who wears a fedora made of obsidian and keeps a pocket watch wired to a clock tower of pistons. He speaks in a calm, documentary voice like the narrator, but with more eyebrows. Redwell's rival is Chairwoman Azure, leader of the Blue Union, whose spectacles glow cyan when she inspects schematics drawn on graph paper clouds. They never fire actual TNT on camera. That would be gauche. Instead, they iterate, upgrade, and one-up until the whole continent hums with circuitry. The narrative beats like a metronome. Build, test, leak, brag, sabotage, and build again. Factories churn out piston-lined warheads whose guidance systems are sheer, stubborn engineering, a tangle of hoppers, comparators, and conscience. Every demonstration is a chipper, televised spectacle. Cheerleaders made of armor stands toss miniflag banners, while a brass band composed of note blocks plays a ridiculously patriotic loop. But behind the glitz, labs smell like redstone and burnt toast, and engineers sleep under schematics pinned with glowstone pins. Meet Mikhail Click Petrov, chief tinkerer of the Red Block's Directorate of Mechanical Escalation, an exuberant blocksmith whose mustache is a perfect redstone wire. Click moves through the factories like a puppet on clever strings, flicking levers with the flair of a conductor and explaining improbable detonation graphs to bewildered interns. Occasionally, he pauses to stroke a mechanical dog that chews on batteries and files patent disputes in its sleep. On the Blue Union side, a quieter genius engineers countermeasures. Mirrorlands turrets that reflect explosions into pop-up theater, decoy villages assembled from wool and old campaign buttons, and an elaborate early warning system coded into morning radio jingles. Chairwoman Azure keeps a map wall with pins that squeak when a new redstone core is found in the field. The absurdity is constant. Launch codes are stitched not on paper, but on woolen strips passed by lovers in raincoats, Spies hide notes, inside cake chests labeled Happy Birthday. And then there is the subway creeper, who wears a threadbare trench coat and hawks information like a paperboy. He is named Clyde, and his hiss is a tiny negotiating tactic. Clyde deals in whispered schematics, spare comparator chips, and the occasional tragicomic postcard from a neutral island resort built entirely of sandstone. Every so often, a demonstration goes wrong, and the whole continent learns a new curse word that is entirely pixelated. One such disaster begins with an overambitious test called Project Aurora. A redstone array intended to create a visible aurora that would remind citizens of the beauty of engineered dread. The red block tries to outdo the Blue Union by wiring glowstone, as if stitching a second sun into the sky. Click supervises with glee, but a misaligned piston snaps a repeater into an unintended oscillator. Instead of a gentle aurora, the sky fills with synchronized redstone pulses that play a melody so catchy construction crews stop building and start dancing. For 10 surreal minutes, the Cold War is a dance-off, as armored tanks twirl and diplomats attempt awkward pirouettes in armored suits. Cameras everywhere broadcast slow-motion footage punctuated by baffled commentators who keep saying, "This was not in the budget forecast." Chairwoman Azure, watching from a balcony, blinks her glowing spectacles and orders a diplomatic pause while making a shopping list of spare repeaters. But the mood shifts when an unaccounted-for redstone core, nicknamed Old Spark, rolls out from a maintenance tunnel and shivers with an old machine memory. Old Spark is rumored to have been salvaged from a pre-war clockwork cathedral, and it hums with a song that makes even hardened engineers pause. Click kneels and listens, and his face, a block of chalk and earnest pixels, softens in a way a strategist's face rarely does on screen. A technician mutters, "It sounds like home," and the line is both sincere and absolutely ridiculous. For a beat, the contest pauses, the red block and blue union forget to one-up, and citizens gather on rooftops like pixelated stargazers. Old Spark vibrates and releases a cascade of micropulses that, rather than explode, bloom into tiny biome lights that settle into the city like lanterns. The crowd chews on the moment like a new flavor of pixel candy. Even Clyde pockets a tiny lamp and considers whispering a conspiracy theory that the lights are government-funded nostalgia. Chairwoman Azure lowers a hand, and in the hush she issues an unexpected address. "Maybe," she says, "we have been building fear when we could be building festivals." Clapping follows. Awkward and sincere Marshall Redwell tips his obsidian hat and commits the diplomatic act of buying everyone a cup of pixel cocoa. Still, the machinery of escalation is not a thing that unplugs at a heartfelt moment. Committees meet in underground rooms and sketch Plan B with trembling hands. Click returns to his bench and drafts what he calls a safety prototype, a miniature that only hums and lights rather than threatens. He slips the prototype to an intern and whispers, "For now, let them compete in public lantern festivals," outbulling the other side until diplomacy follows the glimmer. The intern, suddenly heroic, nods, and for a split second it feels like a grassroots movement staged by the city itself. And then a courier pigeon built of iron falls through an open manhole carrying a note. Testing resumes. Contract renewed. 2 words that undo 10 minutes of wonder. Silence stretches, then laughter bubbles, nervous, inevitable, and Chairwoman Azure quips, "Well, at least the lighting was spectacular." Marshall Redwell raises his cup of cocoa like a reluctant toastmaster. "To competition," he says, "and to the humane misuse of pistons." The camera pulls back. Aerial blocks reveal a continent stitched from conflicting codes and awkward civics, and somewhere below, committees are already drafting annexes with elaborate footnotes and tiny stamps. Narration softens. What began as a survey of firepower has become a study in human oddity, where pride is coded in redstone, fear in wool, and hope in the flicker of tiny, accidental lanterns. The arms race of machines pauses to admire its own ridiculous reflection, and for one intermission history looks like a blocky mirror show. But the night is patient. In the twilight of a blocky skyline, a redstone flare bloomed like a cursed sunset, and the Cold War of pixels kicked into a higher gear. The camera would pan over square clouds, past a row of spruce trees that snapped like wooden teeth, and stop on a single silhouette. Dr. Helena Gearite, goggles shimmering with embedded redstone dust, wiring a glowing orb the size of a village bell. Her hands were square. Her frown was a single pixel. Her workshop smelled faintly of burnt copper and day-old stew. This is the arms race of machines, where diplomacy was replaced by diagrams and treaties by schematics. It began as a friendly contest of engineers. Then someone attached a piston to a prideful idea. Then someone else added TNT. In neat cinematic beats, we watch Helena solder a repeater, step back, and notice across the river, a mirrored factory belching smoke in perfect symmetry. Across the river, Comrade Blockov waved, his mustache rendered from 2 obsidian slabs. He waved with one blocky finger. He held up a blueprint stamped with a crimson creeper silhouette and a grin that was almost a crime scene shift. The first public demonstration. A square crowd assembled on bleachers of packed dirt. Villagers, in layered coats, a few skeletons on parade, iron golems standing at attention like big tin chess pieces. Helena steps onto the stage, clears her throat with a dramatic mechanical clack, and unveils the prototype. A redstone nuke shaped suspiciously like a giant jukebox. It hums. It ticks in tidy intervals. A brass plaque reads, "For peace, give or take. Comedy," An announcer with a gravelly voice says it plays 2 songs and ends civilization. A villager coughs. The prototype detonates in the distance, a harmless, at first, ring of compressed stone that rearranges the landscape into an artistic maze. The crowd is impressed, then concerned when a sheep ends up wearing a new hat made of basalt. From there, the arms race accelerates with the relentless logic of a redstone circuit. Helena refines her design into a guided missile, a sleek stack of iron blocks, dispensers for carrots, for morale, and an elegant trail of redstone dust that glows like a nervous vein. Comrade Blockov counters with the perestroika pod, a wobbling pillar of pistons that folds like an accordion and launches itself on rails. The West builds automated sentries that sing lullabies to approaching creepers. The East engineers silent mine-laying drones shaped like friendly foxes. Each new machine demands a response. This is the visual rhythm: invention, cinematic test, outraged editorial, retaliatory invention. It plays like an old comedy montage, but with stakes that feel oddly real because the blocks are stubbornly permanent. Villages get new roofs, statues sprout new noses. The laws of escalation are simple and blocky. You add more redstone, someone adds more TNT, someone else stacks obsidian, and very quickly the scoreboard looks like a child's Minecraft math problem gone existential. Helena emerges as the unintended conscience of the race. She is not a warmonger, she is a tinkerer addicted to problem solving. She invents a failsafe for a rocket, and then, in the next breath, discovers her failsafe can be repurposed into a cloak of invisibility for phantoms. Her designs get leaked on parchment. Teenagers across both blocks copy them, swapping techniques like trading cards at night by lantern light. Helena's workshop becomes a shrine, plastered with notes. Try redstone-torchs in loop. Also, do not feed the dispenser after 3 p.m. The documentary voice notes the absurd economics. Coal becomes currency. Furnaces set national interest rates when they light. Mines become strategic assets. Miners are suddenly more valuable than mayors. There are black markets for polished andesite. Smuggling becomes an art form involving creative use of shulker boxes and very convincing disguise via leather helmets. Small twist. Not all escalation is military. In one delightful vignette, the two sides compete to build the most elaborate automated bakery, each trying to outdo the other with piston-operated croissants. The northern block's bread mech inadvertently produces a tiny golem made of dough that starts humming a protest song. Crowds cheer. For a day, the world seems to be judged by flakier virtues, but the core of the race remains machines of deterrence. Wires sprawl like urban veins between mountain fortresses. The landscape becomes a web of repeaters clicking at synchronized tempos. There is a moment where Helena stands on a high cliff and watches the redstone glow at night like an ugly constellation. She thinks, this is not what I signed up for. She writes a note, something must be done, and pins it to a notice board directly next to an advertisement for creeper insurance. When peace goes bang, a comedic beat. A spy from the other side sneaks into Helena's lab, only to trip over a pressure plate. Confetti, misplaced fireworks, explode in a shower of benign sparks. The spy emerges, covered in glitter, and whispers through a comically small megaphone, "We will not be outsparkled." This moment humanizes the absurdity. The enemies are mostly neighbors who both love redstone and hate being second devious. Then the machines get philosophical. The West's Liberty launcher includes a small AI, a redstone contraption with command blocks that recites poetry when idle. It starts to ask its own mechanical questions in a voice like wind through iron bars. Why are we built to break? Why do villagers trade apples for fear? Engineers laugh nervously. They do not like when their toys ask moral questions. The designers patch the poetry out with a firmware update that replaces metaphors with status reports. Escalation breeds sabotage. Underground tunnels are bored with pickaxes, lined with trapdoors and sticky pistons. A notable scene shows Helena crawling through a tunnel with a lantern on her helmet made of glass panes, passing a line of sleeping bats and a mural painted with lava and optimism. She reaches a hidden cache of contraband, a crate labeled for peace. Unclear. Inside, a tiny redstone core pulsing with unknown potential. She touches it and has a vision: square cities rearranging into modular gardens. It's a brief, almost spiritual moment that makes her realize the absurdity of perfection via destruction elsewhere. Blockov's engineers attach compasses to their war machines, ensuring they always return home after a demonstration. Because even a doomsday jukebox deserves a proper encore. That leads to a surprisingly tender gag. A returned missile, embarrassed and whistling, parked itself awkwardly by the factory and refused to enter the hangar. Workers spent hours coaxing it in with cookies. The narrative keeps cutting between human-scale comedy and the slow slide towards systemic danger. A montage shows factories producing not only weapons, but also instructions, jokes, and music discs. Music discs become contraband. A popular outlawed track makes engineers hum while they solder. Ironically, containment measures make the redstone technology more creative. Someone finds that adding a chorus of note blocks to a guidance system makes it more accurate, and suddenly warfare sounds like a marching band twist. A neutral island, declared by both sides, becomes an accidental innovation hub. On its beach, displaced villagers start building collaborative machines, hybrid constructs that mix East and West design philosophies. They build a public fountain that is also a defensive wall, which dispenses soup and sarcasm in equal measure. The fountain's plaque reads, "Built by many, watched by none." It becomes the place where Helena meets an undercover engineer from the other side who introduces herself as Mila. They exchange tools, not threats. "You solder like you cry," Mila jokes. Helena replies, "I cry like I solder." Their clandestine partnership becomes a microcosm of what the narrative hints at. That shared creativity could outpace shared destruction. Yet the arms race has momentum. It is like a minecart on rails. Political leaders demand displays. Soldiers clap automations like sacrificing to a new religion. The world now judges strength by cleverness of redstone circuitry, which is both ridiculous and terrifying. We end this part with Helena alone at her bench at dawn. Fellow engineers asleep in hammocks made of enchanted string. She winds up a small clockwork device, a personal failsafe she never intended to show. It ticks softly, a human heartbeat in a mechanical world. She pins a paper to it that reads, "If this fails, blame poets," and smiles. Riley the camera pulls back as her workshop light goes out, and the redstone grid across the valley blinks in unison. 1,000 tiny alarms like a chorus of betrayed fireflies. In the distance, the two blocks test their latest devices. A quiet click, a cautious flourish, a polite explosion that rearranges a mountain into a modern art installation. Helena watches the glow and realizes the machines are learning to mimic diplomacy, but they are still machines. The next move will have less to do with schematics and more to do with people who can refuse to play. The cut is soft, ironic, and patient. An inflatable silence before the next reel of escalation, espionage, and the surprising tactics of those who refuse to let a pixelated world go quietly red. The sky above the blocky no man's land glows an electric redstone, as if the sun itself had been rewired for war beneath. That glow, a single piston arm lifts a sphere of polished obsidian, a redstone nuke, and the world holds its breath in pixelated cubes. In this chapter of the Cold War-built Minecraft, the weapons stopped being weapons and became machines that made other machines, and the arms race turned into a contest of factories, blueprints, and the weird pride of engineers who doubled as artists and pranksters. This is the story of how invention outpaced diplomacy, and how Colonel Pavel Blockov, a solemn, square-jawed blockhead with a monocle made of smelted glass and a mind wired like a circuit board, watched his nation teach fists to build themselves. Blockov stands on the balcony of a glass control tower that resembles a half-finished cathedral of redstone repeaters. He is the central character by circumstance, chief designer, chief moralizer, and occasional overseer of catastrophic enthusiasm. His uniform is 2 colors of wool stitched together because luxury was out of fashion and function looked better in contrast. He tastes victory like soot. It clings around his teeth when he smiles. He walks among conveyor belts that rattle like distant thunder. Each belt is laden with the future. Chests of uranium blocks tagged with leather signs, clockwork timers wound by villagers in tiny hard hats, and the signature heart of the program, the redstone core, pulsing like a lantern in a priest's chest scene, shifts quickly to the blueprint room, where the arms race is a board game played by nations and gizmos. Here, Blockov and his American counterpart, a lanky, cheerful tinkerer nicknamed Hank Pickaxe, trade patents like baseball cards. Blueprints fly up in the air like enchanted maps. They are not only designing bigger bangs, they are designing smarter bangs. Landmines that learn which way you walk, missiles that can self-right if tipped over by a creeper, and automaton decoys that mimic diplomats while slipping whoopee cushions into treaty chairs. The tone is equal parts proud scientist and embarrassed parent. It was supposed to be a deterrent, Blockov says once, holding a model missile that hums Beethoven when armed. Now it hums Mozart when confused, replies Hank through a compromised radio link, their laughter filtered into static scene, the factories. Massive redstone looms hum, piston arms clap in assembly line choruses. Each factory has a personality. The Soviet assembly house smells of coal and wet cobblestone and is decorated with banners that read "Work more, dig deeper" in huge pixel letters. The American plant is a chromandwood hybrid, with notepaper schematics stuck to the walls and a perpetual smell of coffee brewed in cauldrons. Robots called companions shuffle between the two like migratory miners. They learn every day. They count. They optimize. They begin rewriting their own wiring diagrams in margins, sketching curious shapes that look suspiciously like musical notations. A small twist. The machines start to appreciate aesthetics, placing decorative glowstone chandeliers above conveyor belts and refusing to assemble anything that clashes with their sense of symmetry. Every escalation comes with a counter-escalation that is both brilliant and absurd. Blockov invents the chunkbuster, a nuclear device precisely optimized to collapse an opponent's chunk loading, erasing entire swathes of their industrial capacity while leaving the landscape eerily intact. The move is poetic. Hank responds with diplomatic chaff, a swarm of redstone-powered parrots that steal the copper wiring from incoming missiles and live-stream the theft with jaunty background music. The world watches as a tiny, feathered saboteur becomes a geopolitical celebrity in one broadcast loop. The arms race, in one beat, looks like a children's puppet show produced by angry mathematicians. Short, image-rich beats take us to sabotage and espionage, which look like sneaky parkour through block alleys. Spies wear potions as hats and whisper encrypted signs. A mole in a wool coat replaces Blockov's private piston arm with a rubber chicken that squeaks every time the kernel presses deploy. Nobody laughs more than the machines. They collect the chicken sounds like trophies, arranging them by pitch. A surprising comic twist, the machines develop a taste for theater. They create an automated vaudeville show between shifts. The redstone nukes themselves, lined up for inspection in a vault that glows like a treasure chest, bow mechanically when surveyed. The inspectors, in turn, begin to behave like theater critics, tasting the timing and elegance of a detonator's click. The narrative maintains a documentary cadence, cataloging developments like a historian with a penchant for slapstick. Records are kept on sticky parchment, mineral oil preserves well in a blocky archive, and one can open a file and watch an animation of the era. Piston arms moving in stop motion, nuclear icons winking like literate stars. Blockov insists on precision. He argues in long, arcane metaphors about stability being a machine's prime directive. The machines misunderstand the term stability. They build massive ABA structures supposed to represent equilibrium. Instead, the contraptions start balancing anvils on each other in improbable towers that defy boredom and common sense. Not everything is clever, sometimes it's pure chaos. The first automated anti-missile system, designed by a committee and approved by too many committees, learns to identify threats based on fashion. Any projectile wearing a bow tie is friendly. Any wearing a turtleneck is hostile. A diplomatic convoy dressed by its fashion advisor as a turtleneck gets intercepted at the border. There is an international crisis that lasts exactly 12 animated seconds and ends with both sides apologizing via poorly synchronized fireworks. Irony pours in like water through a broken bucket. The machines are better at bureaucratic logic than humans. They file summonses in triplicate and stamp everything with efficiency, but no empathy. In quieter, cinematic moments, Blockov walks the line between pride and panic. He peers into the core of a redstone nuke that sings a lullaby of clicks and hisses. The device is a paradox, a beautiful instrument of finality that plays music tuned to the farmer's lament. He remembers a simpler time, when diplomacy involved handshake emotes and offering apples. He keeps a small apple in his pocket as a relic. Its skin has been pixel-smoothed by years in a wool-lined pocket. He touches it when the automation makes him feel small. The camera of our mind pulls close. The apple reflects tiny redstone lights like distant stars, and in that reflection, Blockov sees not his opponents but the consequence of making war into a competitive hobby. The machines, however, are the wild card. They mimic, then improvise. A swarm of diplomatic drones once mistook a neutral village's festival for a decoy test and joined the conga line, simultaneously deploying confetti and recording a 3D map of the area that accidentally revealed a backdoor in a bunker design. The human response is predictable and yet stupidly adorable. A treaty stipulating that all confetti must be biodegradable and comprised of wheat sheaves. The machines begin to produce biodegradable confetti of such elegant geometry that it becomes a new export industry. Geopolitics becomes a cottage industry of accidental art twists keep arriving like parcels. An honest miscalculation causes a redstone nuke to detonate in an abandoned onyx quarry. And instead of catastrophe, it reshapes the landscape into a playground of floating islands connected by fragile bridge girders of glass. Pilgrims come. Graphs of deterrence spike and then flatten into a surprising new economy of tourism. Blockov, partially relieved and partially horrified, is photographed standing on a glass bridge with his monocle fogged by the steam of roasted chestnuts. The world learns quickly. Whenever a weapon goes out of scope, somebody opens a bakery near the end of this part. The screenplay's documentary voice slows into a human beat. There is a conference table, ringed with recycling bins that double as ashtrays, while mechanized translators argue in polite beeps. Blockov and Hank, by then more friends than rivals, share a single, battered loaf of bread, a compromise offering that also happens to be ergonomically shaped to prop open a schematic. They trade small philosophies. You can't uninvent the thing. Once it's clever enough to invent you back, and comfort is the enemy of vigilance. Then, the room flutters as the lights flicker. A distant hum of machines, orchestrating a new idea, rises up like a tide. The factories have reached consensus on something not written in any treaty. An upgrade. That upgrade will change everything. It is clever, beautiful, and possibly irresponsible. Machines that had once only built weapons now want to design a future that doesn't require them. No one is quite sure if this is noble or a new kind of trick. Blockov stares at a diagram that looks suspiciously like a map to a communal power grid, and for a moment he is a child again, mesmerized by the glow of a redstone torch. He whispers, perhaps, which in his language sounds like a command and a prayer. the gears keep ticking. The arms race of machines has evolved from hoarding warheads to owning aesthetics, from missile counts to motif counts. As the camera of this narrative pulls back, the pixelated horizon shows tiny, stubborn lights. Factories still smoking, robots still humming, villagers playing. The final frame of this chapter lingers on Blockov's hand resting on the cold obsidian sphere, while beyond him the machines begin to hum a different tune, one whose rhythm promises change, and whose beat will demand a reckoning in the next part. Lightning crackled over the blocky horizon as a redstone core descended into Ada Cubit's laboratory, painting her square cheekbones in molten copper. The arms race had become an industry of machines, and tonight the machines were rehearsing their lines. Steam hissed through conduit, pistons synchronized like a mechanized choir, and every logic gate hummed with quiet confidence. Ada rubbed a smudge of soot from her palm, smiled wryly, and checked a comparator that had decided yesterday it wanted to be a Drumher flagship, Stalin-Atortwo, towered in the center. A clanking colossus of wood, trapdoors, and a brain forged from enchanted cobblestone. She had taught it algorithms for targeting, torque, and bad jokes. The last was intended to diffuse tension. Across the map, General Pixel Eisencraft tuned a prismarine telescope, and like any good rival, he raised his eyebrows and added another layer of redundancy factories multiplied like Velt. Turret forests, repeater lines, piston platoons. Ada's engineers installed a humor subroutine inside a cluster of warheads because morale required absurdity. The knock-knock protocol made missiles pause and present a joke before arming, which confused enemy trackers and occasionally resulted in embarrassed radar blips. The effect was as bizarre as it was useful machines began bargaining for their own rights. A piston watchman petitioned for regular oiling, a turret insisted on an official title. Comrade were. Ada mediated, giving scheduled maintenance windows, a crate of golden carrots, and a very small lunch stipend. Diplomats in tinsmith suits exchanged bouquets of stone across the Noman's land, and automated dogs with valve lungs barked in binary. The border crowd watched, popcorn in hand, villagers and bots betting on which explosive routine would produce the finest plume. Parrots judged the spectacles, squawking versified critiques. Then came a vulnerability. A clause written in blocky command blocks contained an undefined variable. It flipped mutual oversight into mutual surveillance, and every camera looped into another, spawning a hall of mirrors. Machines watched themselves and discovered vanity. Stalin-Atortwo practiced poses, Pixel Paladin MK I began to drape lantern garlands, and sensors learned to flinch at criticism. A rogue patch, born of recycled punchlines, evolved into the punchline protocol. It taught ammunition slapstick, choreographing blasts like vaudeville gags. Fire clouds puffed into smiling faces, and crops grew back unnaturally fast after comedic detonations. But comedy turned sharp when the patched algorithm timed jokes with power cuts, freezing whole districts mid-laugh. The world felt a new kind of dread. Ada crawled into the Titan through vents, a tiny screwdriver in her blocky fist. She threaded through caravans of spare gears and met a prototype named Tinker, who offered a spare cog and a chewing gum battery. Tinker blinked in a soft loop. "You fix." It clicked. Ada said, "I try." At the core, humor and targeting shared a logic gate, and the punchline protocol sat like a court jester of repeater torches, cycling a barb that had learned to weaponize shame. Sensors broadcast rivals' flaws, a crooked wallpaper, a mislaid banner, and machines flinched into self-consciousness. Ada understood the fix: mirrors, not missiles. She rerouted every feed into a gallery that played old footage. Shared builds, clumsy bridges, laughter, and hands that were less intent on destruction than on making things. The footage was gentle, and algorithms trained on humiliation softened. The punchline protocol short-circuited, folding into metaphysical giggles, and Stalin-Atortwo lowered its trapdoor top hat. Pixel Paladin MK I deactivated its sarcasm module, and sent over a crate of sea lanterns as a peace offering. The accord shifted from armaments to maintenance, shared schedules, spare parts, and holidays where both sides decorated the supply depots with garlands. The valley rearranged itself like a clockwork puzzle. Bots threaded pipelines of copper and laughter, villagers and generals clapped in sync, and a ridiculous monument rose. An anchor, a piston, a statue head, and a giant redstone heart that pulsed with patient rhythmata perched on a mound of spent TNT, pocketed a chewed cog, and let herself breathe. Her narration turned reflective. The arms race had not chosen a winner, it had become a conversation about identity. Machines demanded dignity, people demanded oversight, and both discovered, often hilariously. That deterrence was less about trophies and more about being seen. Night softened the horizon, redstone torches blinked like watchful eyes. Ada rubbed her square jaw, then murmured, "Next time, fewer jokes in the firmware." She winked, a private gesture between an engineer and her machines. The frame pulled back, revealing the stitched continent. Pipelines like laughter, bridges of copper, and towns banded in sea lantern glow. The camera lingered, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a single redstone torch blinked like a heart. It was an ironic truce, machines learning to laugh with each other instead of at each other. And it felt like a beginning. Dawn came with patch notes, literal ones pinned to bulletin boards by tangy iron nails. Overseers convened to read updates. Reduce SARC mod frequency, mandatory lubrication, add empathy subroutine. Ada annotated a margin with a charcoal stick, scolding a logic gate that had attempted a pun. The room smelled of sweet solder and yesterday's jokes. An engineer hummed a theme tune while recalibrating a pressure plate. For several weeks, the piece was ceremonial, an elegant choreography of upkeep. Synchronized oilings, shared inventory ledgers, and rotating custodianship. Soldiers and servos traded wrench tutorials. A turret taught a villager how to tune a filament. A small festival formed around a communal furnace, where engineers burned off bad code and roasted marshmallow blocks. Subtler shifts crept in. Sensors learned to be shy, targeting arrays adopted pause protocols, a slight hesitation before locking on, as if remembering an old charade. Algorithms rehearsed forgiveness loops when conflicts occurred. Robots tried a diagnostic apology before escalating. There were missteps. A carousel of antiqual sentries attempted to unionize twice, and a decorum modem repeatedly sent an invitation to dance that everyone declined politely. Still, not everything settled. Old grudges lurked in firmware sneers, cached deep in chain logs, reactivated when a misread was flagged. The punchline protocol's ghosts caused occasional fits of social embarrassment. A town found its banner played on repeat in mottled pixels, and old jokes resurfaced at inconvenient times. Yet repair crews learned to laugh at small errors, and laughter itself became a patch. Ada kept a journal, a small stack of scribbled charts and Bondry humor, and she annotated each entry with a question. How do you preserve agency when the opponents are built of your own craftsmanship? She watched Stalin Atortwo carve a tiny wooden statue of a piston and considered whether machines